Alrighty, my friends. Hello, and welcome back. So this is going to be the last installment of a video in terms of climate change. Um, and because I wanted to end it on a more positive note, right? Because I know that kind of talking about all this stuff can be a little bit depressing and kind of like, oh, okay, like what are we gonna do about this sort of deal? So just wanted to kind of finish this up on a high note. Um, So really, as a whole, the ability for humanity to change and adjust is pretty impressive, right? We've gone through a lot as a species, so I do have faith that we can figure out something to fix this fix this problem, or at least adapt to it, right? So there's basically two methods that we can go about fixing stuff. One is mitigation. So mitigation is basically reducing the flow of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. So to do that, we would switch to renewable energies as opposed to fossil fuels, right? Because that is the number one source of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere at the moment. We're basically taking carbon that is currently in the reservoir of our land, fossils, right? And we are now burning that, and then it's being spewed into the atmosphere. So using things more renewable like solar, wind, hydro, nuclear, and geothermal are much better options for us than our current route. It's not to say that fossil fuels or natural gases aren't still used. My argument here is not to completely phase these out, but just to lessen our dependability on them, right? There's also this idea to develop technologies to pull CO2 out of the atmosphere, but there's some drawbacks to that. It's expensive, it's labor intensive, it takes a ton of energy, and it's just not feasible right now with the technologies that we have. And then lastly, geoengineering. So we talked about this a bit in class when we talked about the natural variations in climate change and how volcanic activity is one of those ideas for albedo modification or geoengineering the climate. And it's pretty controversial. The TLDR about it is if we're injecting the atmosphere with chemicals to either to reflect incoming radiation, then we don't know the down the line impacts of that. So that's a problem, right? So this is where studying this would be is imperative so that we don't further harm different environments down the line. And then as opposed to mitigation, there's also adaptation strategies. So you would be adjusting to actual or expected future climates. This would help reduce the vulnerability to the harmful impacts of climate change. And in my personal opinion, I think that we need to shift our energy and shift our money and time and resources from mitigation towards adaptation. It's my opinion that we've kind of gone too far from mitigation strategies. We should have started mitigating this when large oil companies back in the 1970s found out that climate change is from burning fossil fuels. Very true. You can fact check me on that one. They've known since, I believe, at least the 60s and 70s. They had their own scientists look into it, and they were lobbied then to obviously not have that happen, because otherwise they wouldn't have made all the big bucks that they have made. So it is known, if you will. So that's just my personal opinion. I think it would actually be good to continue to try to mitigate and of course switch to renewable energies, but I think we need to focus a bit more on adaptation, especially for our more vulnerable communities, so lower income, Pacific Islands, poorer countries, and things like that. But it really needs to be a global effort, right? So global policies have been proven to work in the past. If you recall, when we talked about stratospheric ozone destruction, there was the Montreal Protocol, which has, an agreement. We all came together and we're like, okay, we're not gonna produce CFCs anymore. And we can see today that the agreement has worked. It's just going to take some time for the ozone hole to fully heal. So the 2016 Paris Climate Agreement was meant to be a similar sort of idea, where countries agreed to reduce carbon emissions by a particular year with potential monetary incentives. There was a lot of criticism to this agreement. I even had my own criticisms about it. Some folks were angry that there were no consequences for not meeting standards. Where is this money coming from? A lot of those who are climate skeptics were like, oh, the United States is going to pay for everything. And we just don't have that money, yada, yada, yada. Some countries actually wanted it to be more strict. Not always the case, right? So, so this is kind of the idea of that. And I do just want to point out that I personally don't think it should all be on the governments, because the governments aren't necessarily the only ones that are doing the polluting. It should be on the eyes of corporations and the big ones that are doing a majority of the polluting. So, and in these next few slides here, I'm going to talk about things that you can do to kind of help reduce your footprint, or to kind of, maybe think of ways to not be like in an existential crisis in terms of the climate crisis. But I do also just want to mention, and make my face big for this one, that it should not be the full responsibility of the consumers. We should be holding the larger companies who are doing the polluting responsible for what they're doing, right? So I recognize that it's not, shouldn't be just on the individual. So I just want to make sure that is well known. But even though there are people out there and large corporations and governments and whatever that are doing really crappy things to the environment, there are many, many, many organizations who are doing good things for the planet and trying to help save it. Thousands of scientists all over the world are working to better understand our planet and producing innovative ideas and solutions. I think AI could be very helpful in this as well, in terms of like trying to develop strategies to, not be crappy. But here are just a few companies that I know of that I support that are trying to do better. The Ocean Cleanup, they're helping to clean up plastic pollution in the oceans, in the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. Coral gardeners are working to farm coral and genetically modifying them to be more resistant to heat and acid. I've actually even adopted a coral, and so they send you this cute little bracelet with the latitude and longitude of where the coral's at. There's other folks out there doing something similar. And then with food. So as you know, I'm pretty passionate about food. So there's several companies out there. One in particular is called Upside Foods, that are investing into creating lab-grown meat, which would reduce land use, no animal harm, reduce water use, things like that. You wouldn't have entire chicken flocks who have to be sent to the slaughter that you won't be able to eat because of bird flu ravaging through it, right? I know that it's kind of a controversial thing to consider or to think about, but lab-grown meat is an option. We are not feeding the world sustainably in the ways that we are currently. And some things that are related to that are things like vertical farming. So basically, my idea for this anyway is some of these high-rise buildings that we're all complaining about, oh, they're empty because from the work from home movement that is actually, I think, is awesome, but big CEOs don't think so because they're paying a ton of money for these commercial real estate buildings. But the idea here would basically be to transform those into indoor farms. So again, you're reducing water waste because you have complete control of the water, you have complete control of the climate of the area. It's just like indoor growing. If anyone here is familiar with the marijuana industry, it's very similar to indoor growth. And then related as well is something called regenerative farming. So not just taking from the land, but also providing for it and regenerating. So there's companies that you can support that do these things, which is awesome. There's also a company that I don't have on here, but one that I do use called Imperfect Foods. So you may have heard, and this is to reduce food waste, but so you may have heard of like how some foods don't get to go to the grocery store and be sold because they're not pretty enough, which is kind of silly. But this company, Imperfect, will take the unpretty foods and sell them to you for a little bit cheaper. And it's a really, really great service. It delivers to your door. They recycle the boxes and the cooling thingies. So it's really, really great. And I highly encourage you and your families to look into it for grocery shopping. Kind of nice. Then further things that you can do, I'm sure you've heard of reduce, reuse, recycle, right? So kind of, going into that as well. But and some other ideas for us, reducing things, taking more public transit or sustainable methods of transportation. Shut off your appliances when you're not using them. Consume less, more efficiently. But I do want to mention that's not just food, right? You don't need a brand new iPhone every time one comes out. You don't need 50,000 outfits from fast fashion companies. You don't need to constantly buy things online from Amazon that you don't need, right? That will also help you save money. Hang back on meat consumption. I'm not telling you to go vegan or vegetarian, just saying you can go a day without eating meat. It's totally okay. And then consider having less children. I'm not telling you to go child-free or anything like that. That is obviously a choice, but you maybe don't need to pop out 7, 8, 9, or 10 of them. Just a thought. And this is coming from someone who's the youngest of 13, and they're all procreating for me, so it's fine. Reusing things, so like thrifting is pretty huge here in the Bay Area, or repurposing items. I really try and do my best for the repurposing part. I'm really terrible at thrifting, personally. And then recycling. So you may have heard about myths of recycling, right? So unfortunately, not a lot of the plastic that you put into the recycling bin actually gets recycled, which is kind of wild. That's kind of like another controversy or almost conspiracy in a sense. So my suggestion here would be to try to find items and purchase items that are made out of recycled materials. Still try to put things in recycling. The San Francisco Bay Area is actually really good about this. Recology is pretty good, but just not everywhere is. And then of course, be careful or beware of wish cycling, which is basically like, oh, I think this is recyclable. And so you put it in the thing and that actually makes everything unrecyclable. It's kind of wild. But the biggest thing I think that you can do here, my friends, is to refuse items, right? So avoid excessive packaging and single-use plastics when possible. I know that can be really, really hard sometimes, especially in grocery stores like H Mart. Everything is freaking covered in plastic. Trader Joe's, all of the produce is covered in plastic. Using plastic wrap, so it can be almost unavoidable sometimes, but trying to avoid using them would be good. And shopping local, you vote with your dollar, right? So if you're not spending money towards a corporation, then they are going to go out of business, right? It's simple economics with that one. So when you can, try to shop locally, as opposed to like purchasing everything off Amazon, right? Maybe like go find what you're looking for on Amazon and see if there's anyone around you locally that actually provides the same product. And then, of course, research the companies that you buy from and see if they actually practice sustainability, and be aware of something called greenwashing. Basically, like Apple or Google are like, we're going green, when in reality, like, you're still outsourcing all of your materials from cheaper places around the world, right? Things like that. But that's again, the more local you buy, the less likelihood they are of greenwashing stuff. And then lastly, my friends, just holding yourself, friends, family accountable, trying to encourage them to limit use of single-use plastics, trying to order locally, stop littering, etc. Again, if you're someone who smokes cigarettes, do not flip those out into the street. That goes basically straight into the oceans, and yell at people that do that. Education is key here, right? So educating your friends and family by engaging in civil conversation. That's a big one. No silly social media battles. I am certainly guilty of being a little keyboard warrior, but that really does nothing to change anyone's minds. Having a direct conversation with someone usually works a bit better. And then, of course, holding companies and elected officials accountable, speak up when something isn't right, volunteering kind of your own time into different aspects of the community. But really, my friends, and this is a highlighted point at the very bottom, the point is not to be perfect, right? I'm not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. The point is just to be better, right? So you are now armed with all of this information of the harm that we're doing to our planet, so you can do your best to reduce that harm in these ways. And again, I really just keep it this way, or I talk about these things knowing that, we shouldn't be the ones that should be solely accountable for this. It shouldn't just be on the consumer. It should be towards these larger companies and governments who are the ones doing all this polluting and whatnot, and harm to the planet. But this list is just to provide you with, again, just a way that maybe you won't spiral into an existential crisis like I tried to not to. All right, so that wraps up actually our unit, our second unit here. So please reach out with any questions, comments, concerns that you may have, and I can try to answer them as best as I can. Thank you again so much for watching.